images here, and I'm just going to set this up as I say my thank yous. It's really an honor to be here. Let me say something about these images. These are both still images and film clips from my iPhone during my visit to the West Bank and mainly Bethlehem, Hebron. Most of these images are from Hebron. This is actually the Aida refugee camp from the roof. Some of these pictures would be self-explanatory. I didn't want to sort of give a talk about my visit because it's sort of like kind of political tourism, and I think the images speak for themselves, but I could explain it. One thing I should explain, though, is that you're going to see images of what looks like a fence over the souk, over the marketplace in Hebron, and in that fence would be all this trash, bricks, feces, things like that, that the settlers throw onto people who run the market stalls as a way to intimidate them. And you'll also see doors that have been welded shut of shops in Hebron that were taken over by settlers, really forcing people out of their shops. They weld the doors so that people can't get in and out. Anyway, let me just talk about what I'm going to talk about. That is, first of all, it's an honor to be here. I love the students at UC Irvine. You all did so much work around diversity and divestment rather, and around really sort of pushing the university and really, moving the whole UC system forward, and take a prize for that. And it's also great that Nasir is a wonderful, organizer of this, as well as all of you who put this event together. It's great to share the podium, to share the stage with Sohail, who is someone I admire greatly. His book, you must read, and I'm sure he's a great professor here. And I'm also a proud member of the advisory board of U.S. Academic and Cultural Boycott of Israel. Most of you are familiar with that organization, so I'm not going to go into that, but we've had some great victories lately, and you probably heard that Stephen Hawking has decided not to go to Israel. He supports the boycott. That's huge, because he's the smartest man on earth, as far as we know. So if he says it, it must be right. We've had some defeats. Morgan Freeman, who played Mandela, but certainly hasn't risen to that occasion. But Morgan Freeman has accepted the Key of Knowledge Award from the Canadian Friends of the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, despite all of our efforts to convince him otherwise. But you win some, you lose some. I'm going to spend just about 7 minutes just saying a few words about sort of two questions that are sort of burning questions for our discussion. One has to do with similarities between struggles between Palestinians and African Americans, a question that comes up often. Another one is, why is it important for African Americans and for all people, for that matter, to stand up for the justice of Palestinians? Now, I'm loath to make the kinds of comparisons of struggle. I mean, these are important comparisons to make, but they can be taken out of context. I mean, I could talk, for example, about al-Nakba and histories of black violent dispossession. I could talk about the legacy of settler colonialism on African American people and indigenous peoples and people of African descent all over the world. I could talk about the state's use of prison as a means of disciplining and warehousing Palestinians and black people, and I can go on and on. But none of it captures the specificity of the things that I saw and witnessed and the things that are happening there, which in some ways, as many of my South African colleagues have said, it's actually worse than apartheid in South Africa, for reasons we could talk about in discussion. What a lot of people often want me to do is to make comparisons between the strategies and tactics of movements. In other words, what can we learn from the Black freedom movement that Palestinian struggle for self-determination could take away? Now, the problem with that question oftentimes is that question sometimes is used as a bludgeon to beat down Palestinian organizations. What I mean by that is this whole tendency to say, well, why can't you be more like, SCLC or SNCC? Why can't you be more like nonviolent? Why can't Palestinians develop nonviolent forms of civil disobedience and work that way? As if somehow that's the only legitimate way of struggle. What's interesting is that whenever Palestinian civil society organizations actually do engage in nonviolent civil disobedience. In one case, BDS is that. That's what BDS is. Boycott, divestment, and sanctions. It is nonviolent. It's treated in Israel as a form of terrorism, which I think is really striking. So it really doesn't matter what you say. The second question, is a little bit easier to deal with and hard at the same time, and that is, why is it that African Americans need to support Palestinian self-determination? Well, the answer is kind of easy. Everyone should stand for Palestinian justice. Everyone should stand for justice no matter where they are, period. It doesn't matter what your background is, your ethnicity, race, class, gender. But what does that actually mean? Okay, that's my images right there. So I'm just going to close this. Actually, see it again. Might as well. Just to get a sense of that, because I'm almost done. One of the questions, what does it actually mean? What are the lessons we might learn? When we wrestle with the question of what we might learn, it gets complicated and clearer because it allows us to acknowledge that, it's not enough to build solidarity around race or nationality alone. And in fact, in terms of the Black struggle for freedom, African Americans have actually served as the junior partners of our oppressors. They've served as lieutenants in the army of white supremacy and class oppression. They've served as overlords of patriarchal systems of gender and sexual subjugation. And right now, if you don't believe me, you can look in the White House. They serve as promoters and defenders and spokespeople of neoliberalism. So just being Black is not enough. When you look at the flip side of the story, that is, what are the forces within the African American community that are supporting Zionism? There's so many Black Zionist organizations committed to defending Israel and supporting war on the Palestinians. I mean, AIPAC has been working overtime to recruit organizations like the Vanguard Leadership Group, group of college students. They've been working with Christians United for Israel, HUFI, again, trying to wage a kind of war, particularly on Students for Justice in Palestine. We could talk about that in discussion, and I've written about it at some length. What I also find interesting is the degree to which the Israel lobby is not only working overtime to recruit Black students, but the degree to which there's been a long-standing African-American support for Israel going back before 1948. And that's something else we could talk about. I mean, figures as diverse as Walter White of the NAACP, even W.B. Du Bois, my hero, Ava Randolph, all celebrated the founding of Israel. They called for partition, and they were eerily silent on the Nakba. The one really significant exception, of course, is Malcolm X. And so Hell could talk about Malcolm because he's very, very strong on this question. And of course, the issue is complicated by the fact that when Israel was formed, it was formed largely by a kind of labor settler colony. And in fact, there were all these, Zionist socialists who had a very different take on the possibilities of what Israel's future could be. In 1967, with the war, things shift. You have even more Black radicals proclaiming solidarity with Palestine, Palestinian resistance, SNCC, the Black Panther Party. You have the creation of the Black Panther Party in Israel, which is made of mostly of Mizrahim. And all this after Malcolm's assassination. The one thing I want to end with is just one example of opportunities lost. And that is, if you know the story of Ralph Bunche is known as the guy who helped negotiate the settlement after, negotiate the partition settlement. But his initial plan, hatched with some members of both Palestinian and Jewish left, was to develop a binational state, and that is one state where sovereignty is shared across the board. And Bunche himself comes out of a Marxist tradition. This is his plan. It never took off. We can talk about why that was the case, but it shows that there's not always one solution to the problem. And in fact, some of the examples of what we think of as Black solidarity come from the most unlikely places, like someone like Ralph Bunche, for example. Right now, we have an organization that many of us formed called African Americans for Justice in the Middle East and North Africa. It was formed by Bill Fletcher, a great labor leader. I'm one of the founding members. Our goal is to build solidarity with peoples and progressive social movements in North Africa and the Middle East, fighting for democracy, for national liberation, for justice, and an end to the occupation. We identify with the long-standing tradition of Pan-Africanism and Black internationalism, and we're open to building alliances with anyone who shares justice.
The roofs are flat.
We also believe that those of us in the U.S. actually have a responsibility, if not a duty, to speak out against apartheid in Israel, Palestine, and apartheid everywhere. And that it's important to fight against the subjugation, not just of Palestinian Muslims, but the Mizrahim, Bedouin, African immigrant labor from Asia and the Arab world. There's a lot of exploitation, a lot of inequality happening in this region, and if we're going to fight for justice, it's to fight for justice for all. We have great principles, and that sort of thing. So let me just close with a quote, and that is by the late Edward Said. And I want to sort of mention him because, you know, Said understood better than anyone how difficult it is to build solidarity and how important it is, and that solidarity can only come from a really serious critical analysis and study and engagement. And whatever the conclusions, we can't be afraid of those conclusions. So he consistently forced us to question the old categories, re-examine ethnic boundaries, and challenge received opinions in order to envision a new era of peace based on reconciliation between Palestinians and Jews. At the same time, as a radical humanist, Said insisted on a deeper democratic transformation, not just Israel-Palestine, but for the entire world, including the Arab world. His critique of Israel was leveled alongside his sharp criticisms of Arab elites and neoliberal policies. And we may not have anticipated the Arab Spring, but he actually called for it. And to close, he says, you know, the current Arab situation is truly depressing. For the rich in these countries, it is a tax-free zone. The poor are the only ones paying taxes. Meanwhile, illiteracy and health problems are on the rise among children and youth. There is no excuse for the state of affairs, and it all stems from a lack of vision, leadership, and democracy in the region. And you know what he's saying there is he's calling for revolution. He's calling for a democratic uprising, and that's what happened. If we're going to support an Arab Spring, or whatever we want to call it, we have to make sure that we support the struggle for democracy among Palestinians, because in some ways, this is at the very bottom of a system of oppression that has really almost no parallel in human history as far as I'm concerned. So I'm going to stop there, and we'll hear from Sohail and let's have a conversation. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Dr. Taylor. So I would now like to present Dr. Dalatzai for an opening statement. Dr. Sohail Dalatzai is the UC Irvine Professor of African American Studies and Film and Media Studies. Dr. Dalatzai writes about U.S.-Muslim relations, race, politics, and culture. He's the author of Black Star Crescent Moon, the Muslim International and Black Freedom Beyond America, and is co-editor of Born to Use Mics, Reading Nas Journalistic. His writing has appeared in multiple publications and magazines. He has written the liner notes for the 20th anniversary deluxe box set of Rage Against the Machine's self-titled debut album. He now serves as an associate professor in the Department of Film and Media Studies and in the program for African American Studies at UC Irvine. Without further ado, I'd like to present Dr. Sohail Dalatzai.
With a slightly heavy heart that I opened today. comments, his grandson was murdered yesterday in Mexico. There's a lot of questions being raised about it. And he's written himself about the persecution he faced at the hands of both the FBI and local police for the kinds of activism he was trying to do. And so if you Google that, I'm sure you'll be able to find it. He's a young man, but obviously in very direct ways, part of a long legacy of particular kinds of resistance. And you know, we can only keep our thoughts and prayers with him and his family at this time. But I just learned about it literally, 4 hours ago. So it just happened. So I apologize for that, but I thought it was sort of a way of kind of like giving you a sense of kind of the importance and value of how we honor the people that were around, and the ways in which particular people embody forms of resistance in a dignified way, but how quickly they can be taken from us. I also, as a result, was in contact a couple of hours ago with Yasin Bey, Mosquet. He's in Europe now, and he sends a message to you all, so I'd like to read it, very brief. He says, "To the students at UCI, my thoughts and prayers are with you all. And as an elder from Haiti told me recently, quote, don't fret, all those who love justice will be satisfied. With love, your brother, Yasin Bey." So I want to open my comments, and I think that, first of all, I want to thank the MSU, the BSU, MECHA, SJP, all the organizers for making this event a reality, all of you for coming, the steadfast commitment that you all as undergrads have shown in terms of like animating the struggles of the Palestinians that came most directly in the form of the resolution that you all passed, and in many ways were the pebble in the pond that sent ripples across the UC system and across the world. And so I want to commend you all for that once again, and thank you for allowing me to share some thoughts with you. It's an honor to be on the stage with Professor Kelly, who he doesn't know, but he's been like an intellectual and political mentor for me for a long time. Even at my early stages in grad school, I read his first book, and Hammer and Hoe was instrumental, as was like subsequent work of his, and I read it voraciously, and I encourage you all to do so because he's a kind of shining example of a particular kind of intellectual work can be done, but how you can marry a particular kind of intellectual project with a political project. It's something that I aspire to do. So I'm deeply honored and humbled to be on stage with him and being speaking, in his shadow. I wanted to open with a few thoughts in terms of framing the conversation. One of them had to do with my trip to Palestine, which I wasn't successful at in a particular way. I attempted to go to Palestine in 2002, a long time ago. It was the Summer of Solidarity, and it was being called for across the world. And I went on a delegation with an organization who I felt I had the best chance of getting in. I won't name their name, but they've been sending delegations to Palestine since 1976, twice a year. So by the time that I went, you can do the math, they'd done roughly 50 delegations to Palestine. And they all went through Tel Aviv, which to me, when I first heard that, caused me a little bit of, worry, but was assured that based on their track record, their letters of support from Senator Dianne Feinstein and Knesset members, that this wouldn't be a problem. So I, along with my brother and 2 others who were Muslims on the delegation, this was the first time in over 50 delegations that they had Muslims on the